I'm going to turn it over to Walter from the Ricketts Conservation Fund, who's going to introduce Brian Yablonsky, our moderator for this panel.
Thank you, everybody. Temple asked me to introduce Brian, and I think one of the aspects of conservation is that we often think about, well, what can government do? And I think Brian has spent much of his career thinking about what can private organizations do. So I'm really pleased to be here to hear what Brian from the Property and Environment Research Center, PERC, has to say about some of the issues that are going to be discussed.
All right. Good morning, everybody. First off, I want to thank Temple for putting this together. I know she's been hard at work at this for a long time, and the Hobbs School as well. But Temple's also a senior fellow with this, as Chip described it, a market-based conservation group. So I'm outing her here, and we appreciate her. My name's Brian Yablonsky. I'm the CEO of PERC. We are a national conservation organization that really leans into sort of market-based solutions for conservation. That can apply for government too, in the private sector and government. Government can have market-based tendencies as well. But we're based in Bozeman, Montana, and I got a team. We have a table over here. Team, raise your hand. Team, they're all here. So good to see them. I was thinking about this. I've been in Jackson for 2 days now prior to this. And we found ourselves over at, I don't know if folks are familiar with the Murray Ranch, and Olas and Marty Murray, who are some epic historical figures in American conservation history, wildlife biologists, and back in the 1940s and 50s, and they had a little homestead that is actually inside of Grand Teton National Park. The cabins are still there. Marty's home is still there, and it's run by the Teton Science School. But the significance of that ranch is that front porch is where the Wilderness Act was drafted in America, and we wanted to use that setting as an inspiration to think about eras of conservation progress in American history, and we've had, depending on who's counting, like 3 or 4 eras of conservation progress. You think about sort of the Theodore Roosevelt era as a time where we were setting up national parks and forests. And then we had a kind of the Silent Spring revolution, where we were addressing pollution and pesticides and chemicals, and sort of bringing in tools that were like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And so the question for the group, it was a small group of conservation CEOs and leaders. Rob Wallace was there. Chip Jenkins was there. Sort of the question at the table for all of us is, are we in the next era of conservation progress right now? And how do we define that? And how do we shape that? And to help facilitate the conversation, I don't know if folks are familiar with Douglas Brinkley, the famous environmental historian who's written Wilderness Warrior and Rightful Heritage and the Silent Spring Revolution. So he came in and was able to give us some historical context to this. And it was a couple of days of really big thinking. But one of the conclusions that came out of that is, if we think of eras maybe in 50-year increments of time, that the future of conservation might actually be locally led. With more, where previous eras were sort of federal policy, federal driven, we might be moving into an era where locally led conservation is getting some primacy here. And I think the speakers here today are all going to reflect that. As we heard from Wes and Osa, indigenous perspectives and practices and knowledge can be traced back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Local knowledge, unfortunately, doesn't have that kind of pedigree, but it's substantial in that it provides guidance in recent times with current stewards of the land. Some of that knowledge goes back 150, 175 years, probably in the case of Albert up here. PERC, the work we do, we work a lot with economists out there. And John quoted Aldo Leopold we like to quote economists sometimes. So at PERC, we reference the great Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek's knowledge problem, it was called. So Hayek's essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, was the most cited article in the second half of the 20th century, believe it or not, an economist article, God forbid. But knowledge, according to Hayek, is dispersed and localized and particular to individuals, particular to a time and place. So it kind of defies top-down centralized planning. And so it may be with large landscapes and managing wildlife as well. We oftentimes are searching for an overarching solution for all from above, when with some of the topics we're talking about here, finding solutions will often require a decentralized, dynamic approach that accommodates not only the fluidity of wildlife in motion, but also the fluidity and diverse range of landowners and the particular geographic, cultural, and socioeconomic features of their varied terrain. So I think what Hayek was getting at is that the knowledge problem can be more of a foundation for a bottom-up approach to conservation, a more localized approach to conservation. PERC's a national organization, but I like to quote the famous Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, who said, all politics is local. I think all conservation is local too at its roots. And so while we deal with national issues every day, we've also dove into local conservation, where a national organization can participate in our own backyard. And for us, our own backyard is the Paradise Valley of Montana. For those not familiar with it, this is on the northern side of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It essentially stretches from Gardner and Mammoth at the entrance of Yellowstone up to Livingston. For those who still don't know what it looks like, it's the scene for Yellowstone, the television show, and that's where John Dutton lives these days. So, but our work there, I really wanted to, I wanted to salute Arthur Middleton, who's here today, and he really leaned into us on the importance of private lands for large ungulate migrations. In the Paradise Valley, we have 4 unique elk herds that migrate from public lands in the summer into winter range, which is generally on private lands during the winter months. And so a lot of this migration involves large private land ownership, ranches, farms, homestead. I would bring a map. I was going to show you a map of this, but when I first came to Montana, I had a rancher pull me aside and said, Brian, let me give you a piece of advice. He said, in Montana, you can bring a gun to a meeting, but you can't bring a map. And so landowners are very sensitive to that type. That's a little bit local knowledge I like to share. They're a little sensitive to like, hey, this is where the elk herd's going. This is the patterns that they're doing. But elk in the Paradise Valley spend up to 80% of their time on these private ranches during winter range. And 80% of the ranchers there experience economic loss. So very similar to Osa's presentation, but experience economic loss in the form of damaged fences, lost forage and crops, predator conflict. They bring predators with them, and the specter of brucellosis, a disease that is transmitted from bison to elk and then potentially elk to cattle, which can devastate a cattle herd. I like to quote Arthur. Arthur says, the herd comes out of the mountain in the wintertime. It's like Pigpen from the Peanuts cartoon, just all stuff that brings with it. And the ranchers, this is great. Like, hey, ranchers are stewarding these migratory herds, but it's a cost to the ranchers. And so one of the things that PERC did in Paradise Valley is we surveyed 35 cow-calf producing families to really get at the crux of what the challenges were. And some of this was tolerance. Osa was talking about tolerance, but how can we reward these landowners for being habitat providers for public elk herds that we all want to see? And so we helped stand up a group called the Paradise Valley Working Lands Group, where ranchers and farmers can come and share local knowledge. It kind of goes back to local knowledge. And some of the fascinating things, we'll have like our state wildlife biologists at these meetings. And there was an episode where one of the state biologists said, well, these herds don't cross the Yellowstone River in the valley. And you had ranchers actually saying, well, I just saw it this morning. Perk just walked across. And so there is scientific knowledge based on tracking and the limited resources they may have. And then there's local knowledge, which can help supplement some of the scientific knowledge. But one of the kind of the big exercise that we went through is developing unique tools for the ranchers in the valley tailored to their needs. Like the last thing local folks want to hear, people coming from the outside saying, well, you ought to do this. We know the answer. We have the answers. The best answers to some of these migratory large landscape challenges come from the locals themselves. And I think that's what this panel is all about. What we heard is brucellosis was the top concern among ranchers in Paradise Valley. Devastating costs. If you contract brucellosis, you have to put your herd into quarantine. And that can run, according to University of Wyoming statistics, for a herd of 400 head of cattle, $150,000 a year, just to suffer through quarantine where you can't sell your cattle, which can be devastating to a ranching operation. Then guess what happens? Sell the ranch. And then guess what happens? There's development, there's fragmentation, all the things we don't want to see. So Perk, Scott Christensen's here with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, one of our great partners out there, Perk and the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. Somebody's going to write a story about that sometime, probably Todd Wilkinson. And but we got together and we raised money to create a private brucellosis compensation fund in the event that a ranch would get, and the ranch doesn't have to pay into this at all. This was sort of gratis to the ranch, a compensation fund that would accommodate up to 75% of the costs of being in quarantine. That's mainly hay, extra hay that they weren't counting on. The ranchers don't get off scot-free because there's still 25%. So, some of these ranchers are amazingly studious. We were having a big meeting with them, and they brought up the concept of moral hazard, which is that's an economist term, but moral hazard's like, well, you don't want to pay us 100% because we might not take precautions to sort of secure our herd and sort of do fencing of hay and things like that. So they're skin in the game. There's 25% that they have as skin in the game. The other thing that we worked on with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition is a concept called elk occupancy agreements, and they've been really the pioneers of this initially, and we've jumped in with them. But you have ranchers that are trying to separate these migratory elk from cattle to reduce the risk, and sometimes it's just the cost of something like a fence that can help. And so a ranch family approached us. And they said, look, we have historic elk habitat on our ranch, and it's on a south-facing slope, so it doesn't get as much snow in the wintertime, and it's native grass up there. It's the good grass. And elk traditionally have been there, but we haven't seen any elk up there because guess what? Our cows love that grass too. And so our cattle runs up there. If we could keep the cattle with a fence that would allow the elk to move back and forth, we'd be willing to give the elk that section of ranch. So for the cost of a fence that we went in together to build 1.5 miles of fence, there's a 500-acre winter range that the landowner now has invested $60,000 getting rid of cheatgrass, doing conifer management. It is spectacular, and the amount of elk that they see up there now is great. It's a cool thing, but that's a bottom-up solution. Like they came to us with that local knowledge. Another rancher heard about it, and we said, well, could we do a fence with you to separate? And she said, no, it's just not going to work. For me, it's the elk are going to get in here no matter what. They can go in the river and get around fences and things. It's lost forage for me, and it's stress on the cattle and things like that. So GYC, Shiva Sundaresan, who was conservation director at the time, came up with this, well, why don't we pay you elk rent? Figure out how to do that to compensate you. So we put game cameras up all around her ranch, and during the migratory period, if there are 20 or more elk on her ranch, we pay her $100 a day. If she gets 400 elk on her ranch, or 200 elk on her ranch, we pay her $400 a day, which can happen. So we're compensating her for the impacts that the elk have on her forage as well. And then the other thing was fencing. I talked about damage of fencing, and we don't like to just go in and rebuild fence because we know the elk are going to knock it down again. So incentives matter, and we started working with the ranchers. We said, like, look, we shouldn't punish you if you got to repair fence because elk herds are moving through. So we'll pay you a stipend, $750, just to go ahead and repair the fence as it is. But if you choose to go to wildlife-friendly fencing, we'll pay you $5,000. It's your choice. It's local. Like you get to decide. You can keep rebuilding the fence, or you could fix the fence and do it in a way that's friendly to wildlife. So those are some of these local tools, these bottom up, like all of these ideas have come from the local ranchers in this region. And this might be kind of the wave of conservation going forward. So bottom up conservation, government, the federal government, I'm a fan of, they have a role in this, right? Like the government can help, can incentivize, can facilitate. I have a friend who says, but it depends on what hat the government's wearing. If the government's wearing the hat of a principal, that's not going to go well. If the government's wearing the hat of a convener and somebody who's providing assistance and helping and listening, then that's going to be a much better approach out here. So that's just a little example of what PERC's up to in terms of some of the local projects. I was going to introduce Valerie Gordon to come up and give her presentation. Valerie is the executive director of Cuenca Los Ojos. Did I get that right? Thank you, John. Where's John? I got that right. She is in charge of management of a 121,000 acre preserve in northern Mexico along the U.S. border. She's director of the Nature Conservancy's Merced Grasslands program, but is still a rancher in the eastern Sierra Nevada. And a board member of the Partnership of Rangeland Trusts, which is run by Eric Glenn, a good partner of ours too. Great organization. And she's going to talk to us about integrating jaguar conservation with ranching livelihoods. So welcome, Valerie.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to be here. And I can say already that the silos that, John, you were describing, you wanted to break down by bringing people together. I think that's already happened. I loved the discussion yesterday from the Black Mambas, and it is actually solidifying some of the plans that we're doing at Cuenca around the education work that we want to do to start this new phase, because I really think this new phase of conservation is all about education and bringing women and children into the future of wildlife protection. If I wanted to play a video. Oh, trust me, this is a great video. Just picture wonderful landscape with wildlife flowing through. But let me just orient you with some words as you're picturing what this looks like. So Cuenca Los Ojos, yes, we have a reserve in northern Mexico. And if you picture what this looks like, I like to say that this is the place where the jaguar meets the black bear. And it's also going to be one of the few places, maybe the only place in contemporary times, where the jaguar, the black bear, and the bison are all going to coexist together once again. More on that in a moment. So we are in the Sonora and Chihuahuan deserts. And this is the confluence of 6 ecoregions. The blue there is, we have a pointer. Let's see, is this the pointer? Oh, there we go. The blue here is our reserve. And you can see the 6 ecoregions that make up this incredible diverse place. So when you think about animals converging from 6 different ecoregions, that's why we've got such a crazy spectrum of animals here. These lines that you're seeing here are known pathways of the jaguar, okay? So one of which goes right through here. I also want to point out that right here, this area is a new section of border wall fence that is going in as we speak. So this is a land of extremes. This is a land of deep wildness. And this is a land that is known for its perennial streams because in most of Sonora and Chihuahua, there is very little, if year-round water. And water, as we know, is the lifeblood for migratory species. And it also happens that this water is vital habitat for 8 native fish species, 2 of which are endangered. Look at this guy. Who's not going to love a catfish? Okay, so the yaqui catfish is endangered. And so is this majestic yaqui chub that, although looks bigger than the catfish, is significantly smaller. but still mighty and deserves protection. So this is actually what brought our founder to this area about 30 years ago. The Cajon Bonito, as this stream is called, was threatened because of fish farms and a lot of grazing that was happening, unregulated grazing in this area. In a desert environment where we have a lot of years of drought in succession, grass can be scarce at times, but around the riparian corridors, typically livestock could find their way into the Cajon and eat little baby trees growing up, which devastated the whole ecosystem because, as we know, riparian vegetation is so crucial for riparian system health. So Cuenca Los Ojos was founded with the idea that we would protect, here we go, protect this Cajon Bonito here. And so far we have protected this much. Our goal is ultimately to protect the entire headwaters, but we have our hands full with what we have now. I'll also point out that over here is a very significant international wetland. North of the border is the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge. And then south here, we are just about to engage this fall in a significant restoration program of nature-based solutions to work on this area. We'll see some slides about what that looks like in a second. So originally, our plan was to protect the Cajon Bonito and all of the species that live there, whether they be aquatic or migratory as well. And we started with restoration work. So this is a simple nature-based solution. You can see this is a very brittle environment. And, this area has massive water that comes in the form of rain events that can last a few minutes or an hour, and wash away topsoil. So this is typical. You can see there's very little topsoil, but in places where these loose rock structures have been built, and we have tens of thousands of them all over the Cuenca Reserve, you can see what happens. It's miraculous how soil gets detained or retained and water gets detained. And then the seeds that are there have a chance to grow. And you get this. Now, slight hyperbole, that's not the same place, but you get the general idea. You can see here a succession of trincheras, as we call them, these loose rock structures that are slowing the water down. And as it slows down, it gets a chance to sink into the ground. And you can see vegetation happening. So this water is ephemeral here. It doesn't flow year round. But, oh boy, we've got a great video coming up. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to use a lot of imagination. This is really exciting. All of this work actually transformed a significant area of grassland, of wildlands, of upland forests. And we knew that there were a lot of deer and lots of other species coming. They're all in this next video, so just use your imagination. And in 2019, we had our first confirmed photograph of a jaguar. So this video, which runs for, I don't know, a minute, has like a badger in it. It has skunks. It has owls going after snakes. It has deer. It has bears scratching themselves. Oh my gosh, it makes me itch. Oh, good. Oh, good. Let's see if, okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. And I wasn't making any of this up. Hopefully you're going to see this in just a second. But basically what we learned through this process is the restoration work and the protection that we were doing was having a big impact. And this big impact was showing itself in populations. The deer were coming back, which meant that jaguars had food, right? We also don't have any confirmed sightings on our cameras, but there are wolves around. Now, I want to say that wolves in Mexico are smaller than coyotes. So wolves in general eat small prey, but the same trepidation occurs with ranchers. They are concerned about jaguars and wolves eating their livestock. And Sonora is primarily a cattle-focused state. how are we doing on? Okay, almost. Look at this. And so one of the things that we are really working on, and we'll touch on this in a moment, is how we can start with the community to understand the roles that predators play in a healthy, balanced ecosystem. And so we also recognized that the restoration work that we had done had set in motion an incredible system of natural recolonization and repopulation. Here we go. Wait for it. Wait for it. Okay. Let's see. And that really, because of this, we owed it to the species that had found their way here to increase our footprint of the reserve and to do more work on this. There should be a little bit, there's a lot more. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. I mean, doesn't that just feel great? Oh, I love it. And so we, let's see where we are here. I'm going to keep going on this because there's a lot more that we can see here. So within a very short period of time, we recognized that we had become a core rather than just a corridor. See, look at that guy. He misses the snake. And so our vision is to build on what has happened, to build on nature's work and to repopulate, to bring back the species that are missing. So while you're watching, isn't that fabulous? I love that. While you're watching this, we also want to pay attention to the species that are missing from this landscape. And believe it or not, okay, do we see it? Do we see it scratch? Oh, did he scratch this one? Maybe another one scratches. Our vision now at Cuenca Los Ojos is to repopulate all healthy, or bring back all populations of large mammals that were once there. So to give you a sense, this includes elk, this includes pronghorn, this includes bison and jaguars and wolves and bighorn sheep and even grizzlies. The last grizzly was taken from an area not too far from Cuenca not that long ago. There's a picture, and I don't have it on this, but there's a picture of it on a station wagon. So it's relatively recent, last grizzly in that area. But to give you a sense of how important this area is, here we are in this beautiful landscape with lots of large mammals. Well, believe it or not, the area of Cuenca Los Ojos is has the second greatest number of large animals in our area there, and we are second only. Does anyone want to guess? There we go. Then the Yellowstone ecosystem. So we're basically like your southern neighbor. Okay. We've got a lot of work to do to bring these species back, but we have a plan to do it. To the north, we have a large area that this is, oops, sorry. This is Cuenca land over here. Everything you see here is Cuenca land. This is the Boot Hill of New Mexico. And this is a protected landscape. Most of our neighbors to the north are a protected landscape. And then to the south, we have a very rugged, roadless area that extends all the way down to the Northern Jaguar Reserve, which is this point right here. And this is, as we know it now, the northernmost breeding population of jaguars. And you can see this is the place where jaguars, these green dots, are confirmed areas of jaguars that are on protected landscapes. So what we plan to do is we are developing plans to bring back all the keystone species that are missing from the landscape. In a month and a half, we are going to translocate 25 bison back to Sonora. This will be the first free-roaming bison herd in Sonora in 300 years. When they left the landscape, and then prairie dogs left the landscape, a whole cascade of ecological function was set, a whole degradation of ecological function was set in motion. We plan to reverse this. Next year, we also plan to bring another 25 to 40 bison and a plan to do, are you ready, John? Prairie dogs in 2026. We have done, I don't know if we can, this might be complicated, but trust me, this is another cute video. We did a beaver reintroduction in 2018. And we plan to do more. We have about 8 families of beaver that have repopulated in the Cajon, and the ecosystem services, the engineering that they're doing is incredible. And here we are, we're planning, we're bringing back the bison. I'm going to state the obvious. Oh, here we go. So this is our plan, is we're going to bring, these are all the ecosystem engineers, right? The prairie dog, the bison, the beaver, and Cuenca staff. So habitat fragmentation, it goes without saying that we've got a wall. This is a very large wall here, the bollard fence, that the wall is higher than the tallest point of this ceiling. For those of you that have seen it, you never really quite get it out of your mind. It's crazy to think about this. But fortunately, of the 31 miles that we have of border frontage, the majority still has a relatively permeable fence. We don't know how long that's going to last, but at Cuenca Los Ojos, we think in terms of forever, and walls come down, walls get modified. We can't shrink our work based on a geopolitical structure. So this is a video you can see. I don't know, it might be too complicated, but this video does show, obviously there's a mountain line that can get through this Normandy style vehicle barrier. In this video, it also shows animals that are struggling to get through the bollard fence. I'm happy to show you later. I think it'll be challenging to get it going now and we're low on time, but if people want to see that, I can bring it up on my computer later. But this is not the challenge that I want to talk about today. We really deal with socio-environmental issues. This is not a place where, the northern Mexico is not a place where there is tremendous awareness about environmental issues. People are really disconnected from the environment, from the incredible species that live here. Oops, sorry. This is very typical. Cuenca lands and our neighbors, very typical. Let's graze every piece of grass that you can. Let's shoot holes in the signs that say, hey, hunting is prohibited. I guess we should say hunting signs is prohibited. I don't know. There does tend to be illegal activity. That's just the nature of it. But we plan to change this. And we plan to do this by bringing children in and doing things like bird watching so that people understand that there are incredible values in this landscape. Right here, we're doing seed bombs so that kids can build these seeds, throw them out there, and understand that they can have an impact on the natural world. Here, we're reforesting agaves. And here, we are teaching about movements of animals. Agua Prieta is a border town with border town issues. It is a place of what's over there and what's next. It is not a place of what's here and now. The words Agua Prieta actually mean black water because it is a place of factories, and the factories, a lot of them are textile factories, and they have polluted the water so much that often the water runs black. There is a disregard for the environment. Also, cattle is a big issue, and then mining. There are also many myths about the evil species. Having an owl outside of your bedroom is a really bad deal for most people. We are trying to counteract that with wonderful stories of beaver. This was a bear that a few weeks ago was caught in a tree above someone's house in Agua Prieta. It had actually crossed from the US. Somehow it got across the wall, don't know. And it sat for 2 days underneath, and people who had lived all their lives in Agua Prieta said, well, what is a bear doing here? They didn't know that they had displaced bears from their habitat. Also, when floods come, some of our beaver have washed downstream to communal ranch lands, and they don't know, the ranchers are unaware of the incredible ecological value that beaver can bring to their landscape. This is a monsoon. You can see the incredible storms that come. They think of storms as dangerous and washing away. This is a really incredible video of dirt roads that go into canals, and this canal here that is just washing away the lifeblood that should be sinking into the earth. Whoops. Uh-oh, what did I do there? Okay, there we go. And so people think of rain as the opposite of drought. In this picture here, tragically, this is a little girl who was washed away and died. And so there's this fear of water. And in Cuenca, we're trying to change that. We're trying to change that by showing that the evil spirits in the bats are not so bad, that they actually feed at night in agaves. We're getting kids and their grandmothers to draw agaves. We are teaching that there are better ways to manage ranch lands than having bare earth. And we're teaching access to the wilderness through light recreation. We're also teaching water restoration through water harvesting techniques so that you can get a restored wetland and grassland. You can see there's the big wall there. But the way that I want to get to people is actually through roads, because no one likes a rutted road. Even if you think I don't want to do restoration work for my field, I do want to do restoration work for my road. So we are going to have projects where we go out and work side by side with local ranchers to restore roads and hopefully teach a little bit about water restoration, harvesting, and grasslands. And you can go from this to this and ultimately this. Right now, as we speak, I have a team of people who have started getting, again, in touch with young people to help vaccinate their pets. Why vaccinating their pets? Why does that get us there? It gives us a chance to say that vaccination is important because we prevent diseases going across to other species. We also show right here, this is a Cuenca dog, that it survived the vaccination and is happy. It also gives us a chance to play some soccer or baseball and tell about the bison that we're about to bring in. We're bringing kids into the story. They go tell their parents. We know the story from there. So we want people to have pride in their landscape. Most children are never going to see a bear paw footprint or see dragonflies skim a desert stream or see the Milky Way. Cuenca wants to change this. We want to bring people out to see the wonders of the world because this will change the future of their lives. It will change the future of the vision of restoration. It will build a pipeline of workers who want to get into restoration and habitat protection and wildlife biology instead of working in factories. So I really thank you for this. I look forward to talking with anyone who is interested in hearing more about our work. This is a snapshot, but I'm really excited to hear other people sharing the same idea of bringing children and women in to conservation. Thank you.
Cuenca los ojos. I'm going to be saying that all day long now that I know I'm saying it right. Watershed of the Springs. Cuenca los ojos. My next guest probably doesn't need an introduction in these parts, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Albert Summers runs the Summers Ranch, a multi-generational family-owned ranch in the Green River Valley of Wyoming. And the ranch has been recognized, and you'll see in the bios there, numerous conservation awards for land stewardship and good practices. Where I saw Albert the first time was on 60 Minutes, which is usually not the show you want to be on. but Albert managed to make it a really good episode. They were covering something known as the Green River Drift, which is the longest running cattle drive left in America. It's 70-mile cattle drive, moving about 7,000 head of cattle over 13 days. And Albert was the star of that episode of 60 Minutes and did a phenomenal job. A lot of folks know him as a legislator. So Albert was the Speaker of the House in Wyoming and served 6 terms as a legislator representing the Sublette County area there. And he's with us today to talk about ranching in the greater Yellowstone and working in close proximity to large carnivores. So welcome, Albert.
Well, howdy. You know, I'm not very techie, so you're not going to see a PowerPoint. So if you just imagine OSA's PowerPoint and where there were dead reindeer put in dead cows, and where you see this line where they migrate cattle or they migrate reindeer up and they migrate them down, just replace that with my cows and you'll have a very similar landscape, very similar story, OSA, very, very similar. And I want to talk about change. So change, you know, change is the only constant. And I had to look it up. I knew that was a quote. It's from some Greek philosopher whose name starts obviously with an H, as all Greek philosophers, most Greek philosophers. I want to talk about landscape change through the lens of my family's history. And what landscape am I going to talk about? I want to talk about the very southern end of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is the upper Green River Valley, which resides in Sublette County. And Sublette County has a population density of 2 people per square mile. The land area is 4,900 square miles, roughly the size of Connecticut. My name is Albert Pomeroy Summers, and I am the son of an old man that was the son of an old man. My grandfather, Albert Pomeroy Summers, was born in 1871. He fought in the Spanish-American War, went to college, then came west from Kansas to Kimmer, Wyoming in 1900, where he taught high school English in Opal, Wyoming. Opal went from a hub of commerce on the railroad to nearly a ghost town. That's human change. In the Green River Valley of Wyoming, my grandfather met my grandmother, who was also a teacher. He leased a ranch at the confluence of Fontenelle Creek and the Green River, a ranch that trailed cattle over 100 miles to summer grass. That ranch, the Churn Dash, is now under Fontenelle Reservoir. Landscapes change. Let me repeat that. Landscapes change. It is how we and the species around us adapt to that change that will define us. Change is the only constant in this world. Prior to my grandfather's arrival, the great equalizer winter of 1889 hit the Green River Valley. It was called the Great Equalizer because it didn't matter whether you were a big rancher or a small rancher, it killed all of your livestock. There are the written stories of endless bawling of the dying cattle, because at that time, ranchers grazed the desert in the winter instead of growing and feeding hay. A winter so severe that it changed the course of history. Wildlife was decimated. Ranchers began to grow hay and trail cattle to the mountains, away from the river bottoms where hay could be grown. The big ranches from eastern Wyoming pulled out of the valley. Nobody can survive this valley's climate. The small ranchers stayed eventually to protect ranchers' hay from elk. The elk were fed hay in the foothills, a controversy today. If you look at the horn pile at the Summers homestead built in 1907, you will see only elk horns. If you look at the horn pile at the house I grew up in, built in 1957, you will see all mule deer horns. My father, who was born in 1915, never saw a mule deer until he was 16 years old, even though our ranch now sits in crucial winter range for mule deer. Species on the landscape change, which changes the landscape itself. Prior to my grandfather's death in 1928, my grandfather heard a wolf howl one night, and he and my father tracked it across the mesa the next day. The wolf was later killed, the last known wolf in Sublette County, or was it? My grandfather died on the brink of the Great Depression, leaving my grandmother with 4 children and a ranch to run. My family grazed on the forest and on the mesa before there was a Forest Service or a Bureau of Land Management. Policy changes. In 1916, the Forest Service asked the ranchers to form a grazing association, and my family was a founding member of the Upper Green River Cattle Association, which grazes on the Upper Green River cattle allotment. Today, 11 ranchers graze nearly 7,000 head of cattle on around 140,000 acres from mid-June to mid-October. In 1993, as we were moving cattle in the Upper Green from Pinion Ridge to Fish Creek, an injured calf was found. The oldest rancher on the ride recognized it as a bear attack. By 1997, our grazing association had a severe grizzly bear depredation problem, or at least at the time we thought it was severe. Our calf loss rates to all causes had risen from 2% to 5%. Today, our calf loss rates have risen to 10 to 15%. In 2024, our association had nearly 100 confirmed depredations from grizzlies and wolves, the vast majority from grizzly bears. Back to what I mentioned earlier, when landscapes change, can we change? Can we adapt? At first, we were just mad, but eventually we realized that we had to live with the grizzly bear and the reintroduced wolf. Today, we continue to graze cattle in the Upper Green, one of the most diverse areas in the GYE, and the grizzly bear population continues to expand, and we have a wolf pack on our allotment. We survived because the state of Wyoming recognized that ranchers needed just compensation due to the losses from large carnivore. Wyoming has a generous compensation program that adequately compensates for losses to grizzlies and wolves. This compensation program may be unique in the world. And Ona, I wish you could take that back to your homeland. We survive because chronic depredators are removed from the population, are euthanized. We survive because we have adapted how we graze cattle. We survive because we continue to search for and innovate non-lethal deterrents like the flashy tags that were brought to us by Julie Young out of Utah State and APHIS. The Wyoming Game and Fish Commission have made testing these tags and studying results a priority, and a full field trial will begin next year. We survive because we have initiated and continued a 30-year cooperative range monitoring program, a program that has grown to monitor our cattle's use of over 200,000 acres of federal land, both BLM and Forest Service. Data gives land managers the ability to be flexible in managing a landscape. Why it is important that we ranchers survive? And that is because working lands, including the Summers Ranch, provide the wildlife habitat, migration corridors, and the intact landscapes that are necessary for species to adapt to the changes that occur on these landscapes. My takeaway for you, it is imperative to build relationships. Relationships build trust. Trust grows the toolbox of potential solutions to the challenges of a large landscape. Relationships and trust shrink the challenges on a large landscape. Remember, conservation is not exclusion. Conservation is the hard work of inclusion. Thank you.
Albert says that he wishes the compensation program could be brought to OSA's homeland. Speaking on behalf of the Montana ranchers, we wish the compensation program be brought to Montana because Wyoming is very generous compared to what Montana pays. So our last speaker here is also somebody folks in the community are very familiar with. Mark Newcomb is chair of the Teton County Board of Commissioners, and he's on his four-year term. Is that right? After I butchered Valerie's priors and everything, I want to make sure I get the sequencing right here. For 18 years, Mark was a climbing and skiing guide which is a very unusual practice in Jackson, apparently. So he might have been the only one, but he was also part owner of Exum Mountain Guides, which is probably one of the most famous mountain guiding operations in the world, and is now an environmental consultant. He serves on the board of the Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation currently. Previously, I can't butcher all these things, all right. And but he's going to speak to us today about how local government can use land use planning to incorporate wildlife and habitat considerations. So please welcome Mark Newcomb.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Welcome. And I'm really excited to see we have a full house here. Very gracious to Temple for organizing this event. And I probably should have paid a little bit more attention. I read panel discussion, so I thought, well, Brian's going to do all the work and he'll ask me some questions. So I'm going to just work off the cuff, but I think I can try and impart an impression of what has occurred here in the past in Teton County, where we are now, and possibly ask about some sort of alternative universes, some counterfactuals if we do things differently, or if we had done things differently. But county commissions in Wyoming are here to enact the laws of the state, but our mandate is to enact the laws of the state so that we protect the health and the welfare of people. But one of the powers granted by the law of the state that Albert worked with for many years is the authority to plan land, do land planning, to implement zoning. And Teton County, out of all the counties in Wyoming, has pursued the use of that power, that authority to protect landscapes ultimately, but also, I think broadly speaking for the most folks in Teton County, promote the health and welfare of citizens of Teton County, both in trying to organize where certain types of uses can occur, commercial uses, industrial uses, but then also for the purpose of wildlife, where we might try and preserve some open space, especially for winter habitat. Only 3% of Teton County is under our jurisdiction. In fact, even less than that when you throw in town. And the rest of Teton County, and forgive me, I don't have the exact acreages or square miles, but it's a vast county that extends all the way up to Old Faithful in Yellowstone, which is a long ways. And but all that land starting to the north is controlled by Yellowstone National Park. And then we have Grand Teton National Park. And then to the sides of that, we have Bridger Teton National Forest. And then on the other side, on our western flank, we have the Caribou-Targhee National Forest. And squeezed in the middle is this donut hole of private land that is under my jurisdiction. And we have 5 county commissioners, so I'm only one voice. So please take into consideration that what I say is me and it's not my board. But citizens here in Teton County are exceptionally passionate about the landscape. And so starting as far back as the 1970s, in the late 70s, there was a board of 3 county commissioners then that were very courageous. And they recognized that if the full-fledged private property right was granted to every private landholder throughout the county, we would start seeing over and over again denser patterns of development. And in those days, the primary consideration, especially in terms of health and welfare to the human, was water quality. And the sewer at the time really focused only on town, one smaller sewer plant. And so everybody who built a parcel out in a house out in the county had to develop their own septic system. The water table here in Teton County is right up close to the ground surface. It's shallow, and it was quickly recognized that septic systems throughout the county would imperil our water quality. So in 1978, those 3 county commissioners approved the first set of zoning regulations. They first had to approve a comprehensive plan that described a vision for the community that underpinned the rationale behind why we needed to implement zoning. And they sat in the chambers, and there were dump trucks and bulldozers circling the outside of it from the developers and private landowners who were concerned about the taking of their private property rights. And they made that vote to actually implement a 3-acre lot size minimum and a 6-acre lot size minimum where the water table is especially high. So that began a process of recognizing the value of protecting open spaces in the county. Now, I will say in the meantime, there was still a very strong ethos of conservation, and private landowners stepped up and made their own private choice to preserve substantial tracts of open space, to preserve their land, to put it under conservation easements. And that evolved and up until about 1990, the early 1990s. There were some development tools that did allow for denser subdivisions to be created on private lands in exchange for more open space. And that sort of voluntary choice did achieve a lot of conservation, a lot of open space. And I think I'll try and describe some of the different ways that big tracts of open space have been preserved by having you imagine in your mind, since I don't have a slideshow, just work with me as we drive out of town. So for those of you who are locals, you understand this. For those of you who are not, we leave here, we go down to Broadway, and we head west, which is that way. And we get to McDonald's and we turn right. And at the Y at McDonald's, we soon enough go around a sweeping left bend, and on your left is a lot of open space, a beautiful picturesque meadow, wetlands, and that was part of a ranch that was conserved in exchange for a lot of density that ended up in West Jackson, and a lot of that density housed our workforce for many, many years and still does. So that was a very early kind of private commitment to making an exchange with some density here and some open space there. We continue to the west, and if we go past the Snake River and we get out to almost to a town called Wilson at the base of Teton Pass, you'll see on the left, just to the east boundary of Wilson, some beautiful open space. It is ranch land, but you won't see many cows there. It's not really being used for an active cow ranching operation. And to the right, you also see more open space. Behind each of those, especially to the right, which would be to the north, you would see some denser housing. So that was a development that took place when a ranching family, the Hardiman family, finally decided they just couldn't make a go of ranching anymore. They had some liquidity needs. They decided they were going to subdivide. The community, again, a passionate community, stepped up and said, what can we do to try and protect some of these incredibly valuable lands? You know, for myself, I used to go out and hunt chiselers, frankly, when I was young, out on those ranch lands that the Hardimans had. What resulted was kind of the first steps towards creating an actual government entity, the Teton County Scenic Preserve Trust, to try and officially preserve the open spaces. The community stepped up, raised a whole bunch of money, and they compensated to the best of their ability the Hardiman family for those open spaces on either side. The Hardiman family still developed some subdivisions, some denser right next to Wilson's, some more sprawling, the Stilson ranches to the north of that. And actually, they might not have done Stilson. That was from another development. Anyway, that was that occurred in the early 90s and was one of the very first times when some actual structure started to fall into place, in terms of there was now an entity, the Teton County Scenic Preserve Trust, that is actually part of the Teton County. The Teton County Commissioners are the Board of Trustees for the Teton County Scenic Preserve Trust that would hold the conservation easement for those open spaces. And then again, there was another iteration of a land comprehensive plan planning process, and new land development regulations put into place in 1994. And that implemented a much stricter minimum lot size requirement that now said, if you own a lot of land out in the county, then the minimum lot size that you can have if you choose to subdivide is now 35 acres, which is the minimum allowed by state law. And that was put in place recognizing, again, the combined value of not just the scenic grandeur of the open spaces around here, but also recognizing the wildlife value, recognizing the agricultural values for the character of the community. Never really a very viable ranching community here just because it's such a harsh environment, especially in the winter, but still somewhat viable and has always been a part of, the last and best of the Old West here in Teton County, which the sign proclaims. So in 1994, roughly speaking, there were a few subdivision tools still left for large landowners, but they really did need to give up some open space if they were going to develop some housing. So then we got some developments. Now, if you come back to town and you leave town and go down the highway past McDonald's and past Whole Grocer and then past Smith's Grocery and out into the countryside, you'll see some pretty nice ranch land to the right. On down past that, you'll get to a subdivision, the Rafter J subdivision, and then also Rafter J subdivision actually came along before that, but the Melody Ranch subdivision created during the 1994 to 2012 era. And also during that time, we started to have home prices started to go way up, and it was recognized that the local workers really couldn't afford a typical family home anymore. So we started to have the need for restricted housing. Restricted housing is simply housing that only the locals can buy, and it's not available to purchase by the broader outside world community who don't work here, but work, whether they work in California, Texas, New York City, Dubai, and they make a lot of money, enough money to easily outbid any local worker for a house, for a piece of real estate here locally. Why would they want to do that? Because we have an airport right up there that's actually in our national park. That airport gets you here quite easily from a number of cities around the country. Once you're here, we have an iconic ski area, one of the best in the lower 48. If you're not so inclined to ski the steeps there, you can ski the steeps right here at Snow King. We have pathways that intersect all throughout the community. You can go anywhere you want, whether it's on a bike, by foot, and not have to be along the side of a highway. We have an excellent school system. We have millions of acres of public lands where you can go and recreate in whatever form or fashion you want. You can fly fish, you can hunt, you can ride bikes, you can hike, you can backpack, and you can ski in all sorts of forms and fashions. It's an incredibly attractive place to live. So folks from around the world want to live here. They can pay a lot of money. They'll buy the housing unless it's restricted. So that evolved into our current situation where subdivision is largely only allowed in the county if we can figure out a way to incentivize it with dense housing that's restricted to the workforce. It's a very complex problem. So quickly, just to describe kind of an alternative universe where we didn't necessarily create these somewhat heavy-handed regulations and tell the large landowners that you can only subdivide at 1/35 unless you add density, and then in exchange for the density, you put a conservation easement on the rest of your land. I have worked with a lot of people who have said, if you had just let private property owners do whatever they want, organizations like the Jackson Hole Land Trust would have organized enough philanthropy to actually buy the development rights and preserve the landscape that way. And that is a tool that has worked, and the Jackson Hole Land Trust does a great job. And it's interesting to imagine that alternative universe where we actually just let, like all the other counties in Wyoming, pretty much let the big landowner do whatever they want. But then with the ethos of conservation here and the amount of, frankly, wealth that is here, let that system, that private philanthropic system, figure out the tax benefits of taking land that could be subdivided down to 3-acre parcels or less if they're along a sewer line, and then come up with the funds to compensate that landowner for not developing and put a permanent conservation easement on it. So that's, I hope, a rough description of how things have evolved here and where we are now. But for the most part, we have some regulations in place, the sticks, and then we also have incentives for large landowners, especially agricultural landowners, to maintain their open spaces. A lot of agricultural exemptions for you can build larger houses, larger buildings. If you actually have an operating functional agricultural operation, you can host events, make money through events. You can host sundry other conditional uses, hot air balloon rides. You can actually host horseback outfitting, and we try and provide a lot of financial incentives for the large operating ranches to maintain their open spaces and not subdivide. So I'll wrap it up with that, and that probably leaves quite a bit of space for some questions, I think, for all the other panelists as well. And hopefully you guys can give us your best shots.
Great. I think
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes. We probably should have had longer, but the moderator didn't read the rules and went long himself. But do we have any questions for the panelists out there that we can field in 5 minutes?
Hey, Brian,
Watts.
I had a question for Valerie. You touched on the border wall briefly in your presentation, and I know the Department of Homeland Security has an extraordinary waivers on endangered species and NEPA to build that wall. But are you finding any willingness from them to work with you and the Fish and Wildlife Service on migratory openings in that wall to help you with the jaguar and the ocelot and other animals that you see down there? None at all. Okay.
if you want to go to the point.
So first of all, thank you for that. Yes, there are exemptions from the Patriot Act. So this is a matter of national security, putting a wall in a big grassland where there are deer. Yeah, that's a matter of national security. And I should also highlight that the wall is actually on US land. So we are in Mexico, so we have zero say on any of that. There are groups that are fighting the wall, and with the exception of one place in Texas, have lost every single battle. The other issue that we're seeing that is interesting is that the wall goes through the wetland area, some of that flooded area that you saw. And the wall goes, 35 feet up, but also goes probably 30 feet down. So all that subterranean water that is being blocked. So it's like a dam underwater, which is hugely affecting our water. There are some small gaps in the big fence. Again, I'd be happy to show you some videos of this. Small animals can get through. A small mountain lion can get through. But when I say small, I mean, it's like 4 inches. I think maybe 5 inches at the most, and they find their way to squeeze through. But it's interesting that like bees don't go through, butterflies don't go through because of the vibrations of the wall. So it really has a huge impact. And the last thing I'll say about this is that the wall currently only in towns has lights, but if they ever put the lights on the rest of the wall, which serves zero purpose because border protection on the US side says that they can't use their night vision goggles when the lights are on. So all it does is disturb migratory species that travel at night. I do want to say, actually, I lied. One more thing that was really funny. So the other day, I guess the ambassador of the US in Mexico traveled to Sonora, and the local authorities thought that he was going to come to the area of Agua Prieta. And so I'm on a Zoom, and all of a sudden there are 50 local police at the gate of one of our ranches down the way. And I said, well, I can't be there now, but I can be there in 4 hours, so come back. And they wanted to come in and secure the border from the Mexican side to prove that Mexico was doing their part. And I said, well, you've got to come back in November because it's too wet to get there. But since I have you here, let me tell you about the bison that we're bringing. And so I turned it into a 30-minute intro to what's going on. And they said, you're going to have bison here? Well, how is all the illegal activity going to happen if bison are here? And so it was interesting because they're like, hey, if we rewild this place, this is going to be a whole new dynamic. So we don't get involved in wall stuff particularly because there's nothing, we have no say. And we have to live with the hope that someday the wall will get modified or brought down, or they won't develop the wall in a greater, in a greater capacity, because the majority of our section is still relatively open. But thank you for that.
Yeah, hey, Brian. Actually, this is for Albert. Albert, first of all, thank you. Thank you to you and your family, and for your willingness to, in many venues, come and tell the story of conservation that you're doing. I think all of us that care about the GYE owe you and your family a thank you for the leadership and what you're doing in terms of demonstrating how private property owners are conservationists over years. And I know that Grand Teton National Park benefits from the work that you and your family have done. I think, and so my question though for you is twofold. One is, are you aware of other examples in the ecosystem that people in the room ought to know about of private property owners doing some similar things? And then secondly is, what is it that folks here in the room can do to support you and folks like you doing conservation on what I call the interstitial space and what you call as home?
Well, thank you for those kind words. I'll tip you later. But there's 3 Leopold Ranch winners in my county alone, and they're all old family ranchers. So I'm not the only one. I'm just the one that goes to the mic the most. So I think there's a lot of ranchers care about the land, and they care about the animals that are on the land. We oftentimes disagree with the government on how you do all of that. And I think on the conservation side, and I'm actually working with WLA on this now, is, how do you, this last winter, I reread the Endangered Species Act. I just, February, I had a hip operation, I was about to do it. I thought, okay, I'm going to reread the Endangered Species Act. See, and you look at the congressional findings, and it says there's these important species in the United States. I'm just paraphrasing, okay? There's these important species internationally. We, the people of the United States, we want to conserve these species. And then there was a line that says, it's the intent of Congress that we conserve these species by the use by incentivizing states and landowners to conserve wildlife, by incentivizing states and landowners to do conservation. And I think until we get to the point, and I've worked with Leslie on this, I've worked with Arthur on this, until we get to the point where we can provide enough funding, provide enough money to conserve this, you're not going to do it by regulation, okay? You can come up here and bless Teton County's heart, right? But this land is worth so much money, it'll overpower in time if you don't get some permanent or at least many-year conservation on the ground. I think conservation leases are going to be important if we can figure out how to do it. I think the federal government has to play a role. and how we utilize private foundations or new foundations to do that work, I think is incredibly important. But we have to incentivize conservation. I often have this argument with a very good friend of mine who's a legislator who might be in the audience. I don't know, but but we argue a bit over this. But that's my philosophy. You have to incentivize conservation. It has to be both a public and private piece of that, and we can do it. But we have to do it quickly because the land is moving. And whereas you think, okay, well, fine, it moves into these richer guys and they're going to take over the land. The churn that occurs in land with these new buyers is 3 times the speed that it is with the old ranch families. So you might, in that churn, you might be lucky and you might get a conservation owner, but the difficult thing is we just need to incentivize conservation. So.
Let's give this panel a final round of applause.